Greenland has been in the global spotlight since Donald Trump declared he'd take over the Arctic island. So, all eyes were on the semi-autonomous Danish territory when it went to the polls last week. The shock results sent a clear message. The island is not for sale, and the people want a vote on independence. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Greenland's centre-right party has won the country's election, toppling the ruling government into third place. The result shows the Greenlandic people want to take a slow approach to full independence. So, what will that mean for the country's future? And why did this election have such a high stake?
A surprise victory for Greenland's Democratic Party. After an election where a break from Denmark wasn't on the ballot, but it was on people's minds. The winning party wants a gradual approach to independence, while Enda, which came second, wants a quicker vote and is more open to US collaboration. With 31 seats up for grabs, there was a dramatic change from the last election. Prime Minister Il's party, IA, only got 7 seats, Enda 8, and the winning party Demokratiet got 10 seats. The Semut and Atassut parties won 6 between them. No party got a 16-seat majority. The election comes amid a backdrop of Donald Trump's threats to acquire the island.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security. I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
And Greenland has been left to question its vulnerability on the world stage. The majority wants independence later rather than sooner.
I'm very surprised, but in a good way. That's the way. So I'm very happy on behalf of Greenland.
There is a desire for change, that there is a wish for a different approach, or that change might happen.
But the country is divided, and people like Nonbo want sovereignty and see a future with America.
We are second-class people in our country. We can negotiate with the process of to be independent from Denmark. And then after, we can try to negotiate with US with many things.
With global powers eyeing the country, this election makes it clear. Greenland will remain under Danish rule for now.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Copenhagen, we have Miriam Cullen. She's Associate Professor of Law. That's at Copenhagen University. Also in Copenhagen, we have Astrid Nonbo Andersen. She's a senior researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies. And joining us from Cambridge in England, we have the Professor of Arctic Studies, Richard Powell. Astrid, I'll come to you first. Just tell us, how significant an election has this been for Greenland and its people?
It's been very significant, especially in terms of the global attention to it, I would say. That is really the difference. It's not in itself new to discuss greater degrees of autonomy and state formation, but the fact that the whole world has been looking at this process and at the elections is really maybe the biggest difference.
That's a good point, Richard, isn't it? I mean, we were hoping to have maybe a Greenlandic politician join us today, but they're all inundated with work and interview requests, and suddenly the whole world wants to talk about Greenland.
Yeah, no, that's right. I completely agree with Astrid that the international attention has been unprecedented, but many of the issues have been ones that around domestic issues and the place of Greenland in the world, and seeking partnerships have been things that have characterized many of the elections since 2009, at least, I would say.
Miriam, talk to me about the Trump factor, President Trump's influence over this election. What do you think was the impact of everything he has been saying, and how did it play out in Greenland?
That's a tricky question for the lawyer. That's one maybe for the political scientist. People were feeling deeply the threat of military action from Trump, People, it made certainly close friends of mine living in Greenland and the people that I regularly work with feel extremely uneasy going into the election. And so in that way, I think it played a part. In another way, I think it strengthened resolve among the community of Greenland in their own sense of national identity and national pride. So some of that actually brought people together, I think.
And Astrid, the same question to you. I mean, what was your reading of how the Trump factor played out with this election?
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, a mixture of people being afraid that something would happen, and we still don't know how that will play out. But also at the same time that this global attention has also meant that, as many Greenlanders have told me, that they feel more pride now, and that they can raise also demands towards Denmark and actually be listened to, something that has been difficult before. So there are pros and cons, and it has influenced the whole relations between Denmark and Greenland definitely in a new way.
So Richard, do you think in a strange way Donald Trump has perhaps done the people of Greenland a favour, that they now have more leverage over Denmark?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I mean, definitely Trump's involvement is obviously the reason there's been such international attention. But I think I agree with Astrid and colleagues that that has meant that the Danes are listening more, and they have the attention of the world. But I think at the same time, it's also worth pointing out that, you know, in the final leaders debate, Trump and the US were hardly mentioned at all. One of the things that's kind of clear from the results is that nobody wants to join one thing Greenlanders are pretty united on is that they don't want to join the US. And so it has, I think, changed the relationship with Denmark, but at the same time, potentially, I think, made Greenland closer to Denmark in a way, maybe.
Miriam, to you, how do the two people see each other, Greenland and Denmark? What's your impression of how they get on, and is this a relationship that's going to be strengthened now because ultimately needs must?
It's a good question, an interesting question. And listening to my colleagues, I think, you know, in some ways this relationship between Greenland and Denmark was already shifting before Trump made the most recent threat. And I think the Trump factor accelerated an already tense exchange in recent years. Certainly some of the Danish history of colonization in Greenland, the extent and breadth of some of the harms of that era have really only come to light in the last few years. We're talking about the IUD case, about the legally fatherless, about children who were taken from Inuit families, with questions about consent, and so forth. And as the extent of some of those things come to light, I think we were already walking on eggshells between the two, and then Trump really added something to that. But one of the positives that come out of all that is much more focus from Denmark on Greenland, and more honest and difficult conversations about what that history was and what it was not, and how to move forward from here.
Astrid, I notice 4 out of the 5 main political parties in Greenland are all in favour of independence. So the only thing dividing them really seems to be the timescale on independence from Denmark.
Yeah. I mean, to continue where Miriam just was, in a sense, there's nothing new in what is going on. I mean, the question of self-determination or independence has been going for years and years, since I would say even, I mean, that was discussed already in the 60s, leading to the Home Rule and then to the Act on Greenland government in 2009, and as a natural continuation of that act, the question on how to move forward towards state formation has been on the agenda for almost all political parties since then. The question has just been the timescale, how fast to move, and when are we ready to do that? When is the economy strong enough? And so that is the something that's going to continue now. And maybe the new thing is that the Faroese model has come more into focus. The Faroese Islands are also part of this Kingdom of Denmark, and in the Faroe Islands they have taken over more areas of competency than Greenland, and so this model is something that's being looked very much on right now.
Richard, if independence were to happen for Greenland, does that strengthen its hand in terms of warding off interest from Donald Trump and others? Or would the Greenlandic people be better served staying with Denmark and having the backing of the European Union as well?
The unresolved question is what, as well as kind of timetable, is what does independence look like as well, I think. And obviously you can imagine different forms of independence, or a kind of future Kingdom of Denmark 2.0, as it's sometimes referred to. The question of Greenland's relationship with the rest of the world isn't just about the US and Europe. There's also a question, or the European Union, there's also a question about, China, Russia potentially, as well as the desire of Greenland, again, as evidenced in its foreign policy that was agreed to by all the sort of major parties published last year, 2024, about trying to seek various partnerships with Iceland and Canada and many other actors, as well as as it were the big players.
Thanks, Richard. I want to bring Miriam back in. Miriam, just from the legal point of view, how, after centuries of involvement, how does Greenland then go about unpicking itself from Denmark, if that's truly what the people want? I'm guessing the first point is to call a referendum at some stage.
Yes, well, it can be. So if I can take it back a bit, I'd really like to build on what Astrid and Richard were saying. Astrid was sort of talking about independence having been discussed since the 1960s, but I think it's really important to note, as sort of the legal aspect, that when Denmark joined the United Nations in 1945, it listed Greenland as a non-self-governing territory under the UN Charter. And what that meant is that Denmark had to move Greenland towards self-government. That meant that the independence question was, in fact, in the consciousness of Denmark, at least since the joining of the UN, if not since the case in the Permanent Court of International Justice in 1933. And this is, at a time when the Cold War, there's a lot of consciousness about the strategic significance of Greenland. And in 1953, Greenland was subsumed into the Danish state, which was always viewed with some suspicion by the General Assembly, for which had expected that non-self-governing territories would become independent. And then the pathway to do that now has actually been set out in domestic law and Danish legislation, which was agreed in 2009. I've skipped a bit of history there, but I know we need to be short. That under a paragraph in that domestic law, that provides for negotiated independence, in which a decision is made in Greenland to begin those negotiations. Then those negotiations take place, an agreement is reached between the governments of Greenland and Denmark. Thereafter, a referendum would be held, and the Parliament of Greenland would need to approve the agreement as well. The referendum would need to be in favour, and then it would go to the Danish Parliament to consent. Now, that's how negotiated independence is provided for, and that's been there for some years. If it got to the point where Denmark decided that it did not wish to consent, if we were at that point, then Greenland still has the power to secede, should it so desire. That's a more controversial way to go about it. It's a more harsh and abrupt end to a union, and it may involve proceedings before the International Court of Justice to determine whether it was valid or not and so forth. But I think that's highly unlikely to occur. If it gets to independence, it's really important to say that there are many different models for that, well beyond, those that often get discussed. Free association is a way in which Greenland could, for instance, be an independent state, but still have a relationship with Denmark or with another country of its choosing. No two free association agreements are alike. Some have had significantly more benefits for the residents than others. And so one would need to enter into those negotiations about how that would look also very carefully and with due research of the great swathe of options that might be available, including ongoing financial support from Denmark, for instance, if it was Denmark that they decided to enter into free association with.
Astrid, to you, how do Danes feel about the prospect then of maybe one day losing Greenland altogether? I mean, is it a concern? Would they be worried?
There's not a complete consensus on this. Some are more worried than others. There has been some polls recently, some showing actually a little minority that would like Greenland to go as soon as possible because they're seeing Greenland and the global attention as a liability more than a good thing. But I think the majority would like Greenland to stay, and then that group is again subdivided into different groups. Some would like the current relations to change so that Greenlanders feel more comfortable in that relations. Others are more conservative. So there's not one general opinion, but I think the majority are working towards, and that's also the stance of the government for Greenland to stay in the realm.
Richard, to you, Denmark puts about $1 billion a year into Greenland. What's the relationship between the two peoples? I mean, who's getting the most out of that relationship? Is that a good investment, do you think, for Denmark?
Well, I think the block grant currently is about 500, which is the sort of formal name for the transfer of the subsidy to the government is about 500 million euro, I think. And then there's obviously other investments in other ways across the economy. I mean, it's a fundamental break on all discussions about independence has always been about how is it financed or what is the economy without the block grant subsidy. But clearly, I mean, even in the recent discussions with since January, Denmark has agreed to invest more in defence in Greenland. That defence is seen as Denmark's or part of Denmark's contribution to NATO around surveillance and helping in surveillance of the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, which is obviously very important for the defence of Greenland, but more widely the defence of North America and to sort of NATO's strategy, global strategy. So I think it's one of those questions where it depends how you sort of frame the question, but clearly also I think there are very deep cultural and historical connections between Denmark and Greenland, which means that like a lot of these things, it isn't simply an economic question, and it clearly relates to defense and security. It always has, obviously, at least since World War II, but it clearly relates to defense and security and NATO as well, I would say, at the moment.
Astrid, back to you. I mean, just looking ahead, the new Prime Minister, Jens Frederik Nielsen, how do you think he will handle Donald Trump and the President of the United States' interest in Greenland? What's the best strategy there?
Oh, that's very hard for me to say. What he has said in the election campaign is that he wants to go slowly and that of course the US cannot be neglected or ignored, but that we need to take the situation, scale down the level of tensions, and start a more calm conversation. So that would be my guess, that is also what the line he'll follow.
Astrid, in all the news coverage of the election, we read that Greenlanders wanted better housing, better economic opportunities, education, and healthcare to improve. But having such a seismic figure as President Trump wanting your country, this is top of the in tray, I guess, for the new Prime Minister.
Yeah, of course, it's something that has to be dealt with, that sustained interest from the US. There are a lot of unknowns there that we don't know about yet. But on the other hand, the election campaign has also shown that people in Greenland care about their everyday life and their everyday life problems. And that is also the expectation that the new government will pay considerable attention to that, and especially the development of the economy seems to be a major concern there, and that means looking into developing not just the fishery, but also the fishery is something that played a huge role in the election campaign, something that has been probably overlooked by most international media. But a modernization of the, but also more fair fishery policy is something that has been discussed a lot. Then also the development of the tourism sector and the mining sector, of course, and other sectors, also new startups and private companies is something that the new government will probably have as some of its main agendas.
Miriam, you understand the law. Is it even legally possible what Donald Trump wants to do with Greenland?
This is a great question, and one that I wish more journalists would ask. Because when the headlines say Trump wants to buy Greenland, it implies that you can just pop along to another sovereign place and purchase territory. And maybe that once was what happened, but it isn't the way it works today. Greenland is sovereign territory. At the moment, it's part of Denmark. But the people of Greenland hold the right of self-determination, and you cannot simply purchase it. One of the things that's deeply problematic about this is that it implies that you can not only take the land, but also implicitly take those people and all of the other assets and connections that exist on Greenland. And that's deeply inequitable and compromises and contradicts a number of very strong principles of international law. So you cannot simply purchase another state. Interestingly, under the law in Greenland, you actually can't privately own property or the land. You can own the house on which the land and it sits on the land, but you can't actually privately own land. So even if Trump wanted to purchase a piece of land, he could not. He could perhaps purchase leasing rights to a particular part. And this gets to another point, which is that the United States already has military bases on Greenland, already has a great deal of presence in Greenland in terms of defence strategic significance. And I think one of the things that the foreign minister and other ministers foreign minister of Denmark and ministers in Greenland have spoken to is they're open to conversations. If the United States feels that it wants, a different kind of presence or a greater presence, they've always had these conversations about defence and are happy to continue to have them. So, but in terms of actual legal purchasing, that's simply not how it works. This is a transfer of sovereignty that would need the consent of the Greenlandic people and the consent of Denmark to move forward with a transfer of sovereignty. And that's a really different question than simply buying a place. It's not a business transaction.
Astrid, final point to you. Give us your prediction. How long does the relationship between Denmark and Greenland last? Is this the beginning of the end?
Neither or. I mean, we spoke about the discussion on self-determination and independence, and I would say that was formulated, at least the first time I saw it on print, in 1930 by a Greenlandic intellectual politician, Matthias Storck, in 1930. So the wish for having your own Greenlandic state is old, and so Greenland is going to move in that direction. If that is going to take 10 years or 50 years, time will show. But no matter what happens, Greenland and Denmark will always have a relation, of course, because we have 300 years of colonial history together, and many cultural and also family ties, and a shared history, and both a problematic one, but also there are also good things in it. And so this will of course continue no matter what happens, and that is what you see in all relations between former colonies and colonial powers, even states that have independence. So neither or, I would say.
Astrid, Miriam and Richard, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.